Gyfeillion bore da, croeso cynnes bob un ohonoch chi unwaith eto wrth i ni cyfarfod yma fel corff llywodraethol yr Eglwys yng Nghymru. Welcome everyone. It's a delight to welcome you back to the ICC for this gathering of the governing body. I'm conscious this will be the first meeting for some, and for some it will be a return. Each and every one of you for your contribution, thank you, and it's good that we're here gathered to confer together. I want to take the opportunity to welcome the representatives of other churches, if I may, as usual. I'm delighted that once more the Reverend Gethin Rhys ar gyfer cytun wedi cytuno I fod gyda ni, a mae Gethin yma, reit ar cefn. Diolch o galon, Gethin, croeso cynnes I chi. And also I understand that Sean Brynach is here. Sean, rwyt yma yn rhywle dwi'n credu. Diolch o galon am ddod. As you know, Sean Brynach is the Chief Executive of Cytun at the moment, shortly to join the ministry team in the Diocese of Llandaff. It's wonderful. We do so value our good relationship with Cytun. Thank you both for being here. The Reverend Brian Matthews would be representing the Presbyterian Church of Wales and sends his apologies and good wishes to us as we meet. And the United Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, Carol Miller, who is their church engagement manager, I understand is here. Carol, are you here? Lovely. Welcome to you. Thank you so much for taking time to join us in the governing body. Unwaith eto mae Reverend Jeff Williams yma ar gyfer undeb yr Annibynwyr Cymraeg. Diolch yn fawr, Jeff. Nes weld chi unwaith eto croeso cynnes I chi. And representing Christian Aid Cymru, Rebecca Elliott, and I'm delighted that Mary McNeil is back with us. No stranger at all to the church in Wales, and they, of course, will be one of the stalls at the back of the hall area, about which I will say a word in a moment, but it's a delight to welcome them as usual. It's been our practice that representatives are given the opportunity to speak and participate in governing body, but not to vote. So, as ever, it is good for us to hear the contribution of others. Please do be forthcoming in those contributions. You are most welcome to participate in our deliberations. I'm so grateful once more to my chaplain, the Reverend James Tout, who has agreed to be responsible for worship here in governing body. And this evening, Evensong will take place at Newport Cathedral and incorporate the Sacred Synod to confirm the appointment of the Bishop of Bardsey, Canon David Morris. And I'm so delighted that we're able to be at the cathedral. We think this is the first, or if not the first for a very long time, that the governing body has met at one of our cathedrals or attended a cathedral as part of our worship at GB. So my thanks to the Dean and Chapter and to Bishop Cherry for making the cathedral available for this significant meeting. And in relation to the Sacred Synod, please can I invite everyone to come, even though there is a trip from here to the cathedral. It's so important that we affirm David's call to this new ministry in that way. So please do make every effort to join us. I mentioned the exhibition tables, which are in the hall as you came in. And I want to draw your attention to several, because I think this is the greatest number we've had for some time, possibly ever, and that's a good thing. First of all, the new prayer manual, Daily with God, about which Bishop Gregory will say something just before lunch, will be available for purchase outside the meeting room. Please do visit that stall. And also, I want to draw particular attention to National Energy Action Cymru. The National Fuel Poverty Charity is working to ensure everyone stays warm and safe at home, and we're delighted they're joining us here. Colleagues, you will remember the Food and Fuel campaign that was undertaken by the church in Wales last year. It was very much because of the advice that we were receiving from people like National Energy Action Cymru, that we were able to engage with the government as directly as we were, whether it was in relation to prepay meters or the level of standing charges or the general tariffs and the effect it was having upon people who were least able to pay for their fuel. So as a source for us to access information, their work is invaluable. Please do make every effort to visit that stall as well. And lastly, I mentioned how delighted I was that Mary McNeil was here. Cymorth Cristnogol Cymru are once again present, and someone has foolishly agreed to run 10K over 7 days to advertise Christian Aid Week. Please do visit the stall and learn more about that. Can I say a little word about motions, please? Amendments to motions are always possible in the life of the governing body, but 2 written copies are required, signed by the proposer, and amendments need to be given to the lay secretary, to Canon Simon Lloyd to my left, and an email sent to amendments@churchinwales.org.uk shall be deemed sufficient to meet the requirements of providing 2 written copies. So if you are unclear about how amendments are to be brought to the floor, please do speak to Canon Simon Lloyd. It's been our practice to always allow non-members to participate in the GB, and it's been our practice to take on block your assent to such people taking place. Can I just quickly run through the names that have been provided to me? First of all, Alex Glanville, Head of Property Services, in relation to item 12. James Wallace, who is the Chief Executive of River Action, will be present tonight and tomorrow. Dr. Christian Dunn, who is Associate Director of the Bangor Wetlands Group and Associate Pro-Vice Chancellor for Sustainability at Bangor University, both speaking in relation to item 15. And of course, the Reverend Professor Jeremy Duff is with us and will be speaking in relation to item 16. This is a simple majority decision by the governing body. If you're prepared for all of those to take part in our meeting, would you please show? Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? That's clearly passed. Thank you very much for that. The lay secretary, of course, Canon Simon Lloyd, has the right to speak at any time during our gathering as a governing body. Mae'n groeso, bob amser I ni siarad yn y Gymraeg, gai cefnogi pawb I ddefnyddio'r iaith. Mae Tudur Jones yma gyda ni fel arfer, felly pawb sydd ar gallu I siarad yn y Gymraeg, gai cefnogi bob un I cyfrannu ei cyfraniad yn yr iaith Gymraeg. I think those are all the formalities that we need before we turn our attention to the agenda proper. Can I then move us on to item 3, which is the minutes of the ordinary meeting of the GB held on the 5th and 6th of September 2023. The minutes have been already enclosed. You've been asked to notify the Secretariat in advance of any changes proposed so information can be available for us in advance of our meeting. No one has raised any point on the minutes of these minutes. May I ask the governing body to vote, and by a simple majority, if you're in favour of receiving these minutes, please show. Thank you very much. Are there any against? And any abstentions? May I then sign the minutes as a correct record of the meeting of the governing body held on 5th and 6th of September 2023, and a nod will do. Thank you for your nods. Turning to item 4, matters arising on the minutes. Again, you are asked to notify the Secretariat by Friday, the 12th of April, of any matters that you wished to raise. No comments have been received on those minutes. I think that completes our attention to all of the minutes, and I now concede the chair.
Bore da pawb. Mae'n bleser cadeirio'r sesiwn hon heddiw. Dwi'n mynd I siarad yn Gymraeg. I'm going to speak in Welsh. Fel dwedais I, mae'n bleser bod yma heddi a weld chi gyd. Symudwn at item 5, anerchiad y llywydd. Hoffwn wahodd ein harchesgob I gyflwyno ei anerchiad. E-bostiwyd copi o'r anerchiad I chi ddoi, ac fe fydd yn cael ei gyhoeddi ar wefan yr Eglwys yng Nghymru nes ymlaen. Archesgob Andrew.
Yes? Wonderful. Diolch yn fawr. Diolch, Cadeirydd. Governing body, Andrew, Archbishop of Wales. I wish to speak in Welsh, if I may, to begin with. Gyfeillon, yn ei llyfr Radical Uncertainty, mae athro John Kay a Sir Mervyn King yn mynd i'r afel a chwestiwn dwys a heriol. Pam na ragwelodd neb ar gyfwng economaidd 2008. Wrth gofio cyfarfyddiad ar ddiweddar Frenhines, yr hon a yfynodd yr union y cwestiwn hwn iddynt, a maent yn ymaflyd yn y penblethau amlyca. Ni awyddom beth awyddom, weithiau, i ni'n gwybod beth nad ydyn ni yn ei wybod, ond beth am y pethau nad ydyn ni ei gwybod, nad ydyn ni ei gwybod. Mewn geiriau eraill, pan fo naill ai darnau o wybodaeth ar goll sydd o'i darganfod yn profi'n hanfodol neu lle mae lefelau wrth gefn yn sylweddol. Sut ydyn ni'n cynllunio camau gweithredu pan fo'r dirwedd yn cynnig cynlleiad o sicrwydd? Mae'r llyfr wedi cael ei ddarllen yn eang iawn ac mae mor argyhoeddiadol yn ei ddadansoddiad ag yw yn rhagnodau a gynigir. Mae'n anodd ymgydomi a chymlethdod lle nad yw'n hawdd bod yn hollol siŵr. O'i ddarllen roedd y tebygrwydd a'n sefyllfa ni'n ddiddorol ac I mi dwi eisiau defnyddio rhywfaint o'i ffordd o feddwl I gynorthwyo ein myfyrdodau ein hunain am sut olwg allai fod ar y dyfodol. Yn benodol, rwyf am ganolbwyntio a rai o egwyddorion y maent yn ei mynegu, a sut y maent yn effeithio ar ein y cyd-destun ein hunain. Yn syndod am lyfr sy'n ymwneud yn bennaf am economeg, ac nid anhebyg I lyfr Mark Carney, Values, Building a Better World for All, maent yn cydnabod gwerth narratif. Mewn geiriau arall, y straeon I ni'n hadrodd amdanom ein hunain. Y byd, pwy ydyn ni? Mae straeon hyn yn cyfnodi hanes ac yn cynnwys gwerthoedd, felly mae'n yn cynnig math o gyfnod. Ein iaith ni ein hunain yw iaith traddodiad, sydd yn apostolaidd a'i chymeriad a'i tharddiad. Ac mae'r ymadrodd hwn yn ddeiblaidd, oherwydd derbyniais I gan yr arglwydd, meddai Paul, yr un hefyd a drosglwyddiais I chwi, yr arglwydd Iesu, Y noson, y brydychwyd ef a gymerodd fara, ac wedi diolch fe'i torodd ac y ddwedodd hwn yw fy nghorff i sydd i'ch chwi. Gwnewch hyn cof amdanaf. Yn yr un modd ar ôl swper, cymerodd y cwpan gan ddweud y cwpan hwn yw'r cyfamod newydd yn fy ngwaed i. Gwnewch hyn pryd bynnag y byddwch yn ei yfed cof amdanaf. Felly, ein man cychwyn yw dywynyddol. A dywynyddiaeth sy'n llunio, yn datblygu ac yn dyfynhau ein dealltwriaeth o Dduw, a'n galwad i ddilyn Iesu Grist. Yng Nghymru, rydym wedi datblygu ein naratif ein hunain o fewn traddodiad apostolaidd hwn, yn adrodd stori am eglwys a alwyd i wasanaethu'r genedl gyfan. Mewn llyferydd ddiweddar, tynnodd y prif weinidog, cyn prif weinidog Mark Drakeford, sylw at y rhan a chwaraewyd gan yr eglwys yng Nghymru yn 2021 wrth i ddigwyddiadau erchyll Aberfan gael ei dwyn i gof, just fel esiampl. Ond wythnos ar ôl wythnos, nid digwyddiadau arloesol fydd yn llunio hunaniaeth cenedl, bydd yn ddigwyddiadau bywyd a sut y mae eraill yn ein cefnogi a'n helpu ni drwyddynt. Bydd pob un ohonom yn dioddef adegau a gollwyd a thorcalon, a byddwn yn cofio rai a ddangosodd garedigrwydd, cariad a thosteri. Yn ei gweinidogaeth gyfeillio, mae'r eglwys yng Nghymru yn dangos bod Duw yn caru'r byd ac yn estyn trwm gyda gras trawsnewidiol Iesu Grist. A dros cyfnod y Pasg ar lefel rhywbeth bersonol, gai dalu deyrnged eto i waith clerigwyr, gweinidogion lleug trwyddedig ac eraill di-ri sy'n gwasanaethu eraill oherwydd ei ffydd yn Iesu Grist. Dwi'n mor ddiolchgar. Diolch yn fawr i bob un ohonoch. Ond wrth i ni wasanaethu rai o'n cwmpas, i ni'n gwneud hynny fel Cristnogion. Nid ydym yn gorff anllywodraethol, nac yn fraich o lywodraeth chwaith. Rydym yn cael ein gorfodi i godi llais ar faterion lle credwn fod rhywbeth allan o le. Felly, byddwn yn siarad am xenophobia lle bynnag y byddwn yn ei weld. Byddwn yn siarad am fywyduriaid a beth sy'n digwydd yn San Steffan gyda'r un o'r biliau sydd ger bron y tŷ cyffredin. Byddwn bob amser yn siarad o blaid y tlawd, y dadfeddiant, y rai sydd ar ymylon a'r gorthrymedig. Mae gwerthoedd teyrnas yn ein gorfodi i siarad. As an example of this, and here I turn to English, tomorrow we will welcome 2 speakers from the forthcoming Restoring Welsh Rivers Summit to be hosted by the Church in Wales. Why should we be concerned about water? Because our rivers are dying. Water companies are illegally pumping raw sewage into them. And even as sections of our farming communities are underpaid and undervalued, intensive farming practices promoted by unsustainable food production systems are poisoning rivers with excess fertilizer and animal waste. You only need to witness the tragic situation in the Wye Valley. We recognise investment is being made, and we welcome this to improve our drainage systems, and improvements are being delivered. But all of us, the industry, the regulators, government especially, and local authorities must play a part in halting this indefensible abuse of one of the most essential elements of life. And our summit will seek to create a consensus, but also produce momentum for change. And in a year as we prepare for an election to the Welsh Parliament, it is essential that this item remains high on our priorities. Our primary task, of course, as a church, is to be the Eucharistic community of our Lord Jesus Christ, worshipping God, bearing witness to the gospel. In that sense, our task is unchanging across the generations. We are here for God's sake and for the world. What enables an organisation to flourish within that understanding, within its inherited tradition, is when it's able to learn, to develop, to grow. We have to deal with the concept of continuous change. It's now widely understood, where change is unexpected. And when change becomes normative and less predicated on what's taken place previously, this makes for greater uncertainty. But if the church is to serve each part of Wales, it must learn that it cannot be one thing only, a single model with no scope to adapt, hoping that only by its reputation, its presence, and its former practices that somehow it will guarantee strong and ongoing interaction with others. Governing body will know that we're seeking to change our way of being a church, learning together differently so that the church can serve the world and one another. And our learning community, scheduled for later this year, will draw people together in a different kind of conversation. So experience is articulated, practice is analysed, and a collective will to move forward is forged in ministry for God. And our emphasis, again, governing body will know, is on the way on which or in which our mission and ministry areas work. Now, however they are configured within our diocese, they share several essential elements which we ought not to concede. Firstly, we can do more, better, together. There are things which single parishes could never do that a mission or a ministry area can do. Let me give you some examples. In Bangor Diocese, just my own, a ministry area has recently worked with the diocese and DBF to employ a full-time youth pioneer worker to minister across a wider area. And cooperating with other ministry areas has broadened the base of engagement. That kind of partnership where finance, local leadership, and the work of the diocese combine is transformative. Another ministry area has planned for an Anna chaplain, having taken the hard work of discerning the context in which they live and the number of older and often isolated people in their area. Again, the potential for a wider reach is made possible because the ministry area is a larger geographical unit. Secondly, we build good collegiality. The expectation that clergy are jack of all trades who do all the ministry and that's all shouldn't work, hasn't worked, and never did. It's the ministry of all. It's the ordained, the licensed, the commissioned, the gifted disciples of Christ that make for a complete, biblical, and rounded model of servant ministry. And I'm so delighted that my colleagues on the bench have done so much work on this. In particular, I know in the Diocese of St. Asaph and Monmouth, prioritising the collegial relationships within the areas of ministry, strengthening the local with a trans-local emphasis so that wider, bigger agendas allow the gifts of the whole body of Christ to be deployed beyond a single church or a former single parish. And thirdly, and lastly, in this journey, we're learning to be courageous. Once again, more than a toe put into the waters. We're learning to take risks. Not everything we do is going to work, but by playing it completely safe, we we'll get nowhere. Football is a mistakes game, he said. Without mistakes, you can't play it. Jurgen Klopp, good man. And that's true for churches too, isn't it? It's the risk takers rather than the cautious who were commended in the parable of the talents. And so, we have an opportunity to develop ministry from the base of lived experience, what we are learning, what we are discerning in our midst. And early applications to the Church Growth Fund are showing that dioceses are building on what is being learned through our mission and ministry areas, whether in the development of hub churches, planting new congregations, strengthening the base of our mission and ministry areas, or appointing pioneers and chaplains to aid us bear witness to Jesus Christ in the world. And that kind of approach is part of King and Kay's thesis. Now, we may not be familiar with some of their language, and I'm not a mathematician. If there are any present, please don't shout at me. I think stationarity is about the process of collecting data, testing results over time, using that data to inform decisions. In other words, it's about discernment. How can we tell if something is really working if we have no base data with which to compare? We need to be able to monitor both qualitative and quantitative inputs if we're to have any hope of seeing good outputs. Now, this approach to life in the Church of Wales, it may not be entirely new, but neither is it something that is entirely familiar with all of us. But if we are going to track with care, for example, our CO2 footprint and take remedial steps, we will need a tool which will aid us as we have. If we are to understand where our numbers lie in our congregations and track changes and shifts, we need a membership app to aid us. We need to use it. And if we are to pour many, many, many millions of pounds into a fund we call the Church Growth Fund, we really do need to track and test whether that level of investment is making any difference at all. Now, I know this can sound sterile and very businesslike, devoid of the kind of human dynamics that are the lifeblood of our church. I understand that. Kay and King have a surprising and pleasingly strong emphasis here, which will help us. Organizations which survive in this environment have two further emphases. They practice the art of curiosity, and they're prepared to evolve. This resolve, which I know we embrace, allows us to imagine a good future, but not constructing impossible dreams. Anyone can cast visions, but they're illusory. They sound impressive, but are actually fantasies. The kind of life which brings hope is built one step at a time. Faithful reflection on our contexts, asking good questions, starting to plan and practice the things which allow us to be true to our calling. You see, mindfulness is not just a personal discipline, it's a shared enterprise. And when ministry and mission area councils are able to work towards that purposeful ambition by wise, trained, careful exercise of shared leadership, we are mentored into a different way of working, and that brings hope. If we don't do this, we should take a look at the world around us. Perhaps in the last 20 years, the greatest example of not cultivating an awareness of what's happening is what happened in the mobile phone industry. If you're as old as me, you remember the Nokia 7600. Absolutely, whoever you are. It would change the way we communicated. In 2003, its strong, sturdy box was given with clear instrumentation and new functionality. And then something happened, and he was called Steve Jobs. And within 6 years, Nokia were wiped off the market. The value of imagination cannot be minimized, but neither can that openness and that clarity of purpose and determination. A little word more in Welsh, if I may, and then we draw things to a close. Dwi wedi treulio llawer o'r achlysur hwn yn siarad am y ffordd yr ydym yn gosod uchelgeisiau un hunain a strategaeth. Ond dwi eisiau gorffen gyda'r rhan bwysica o'n bywyd sy'n cyffwrdd â'n weddigar, ein ffydd cyffredin yng Nghrist, a sut i ni'n dysgu maddau a cherdded yn agos gyda Duw. Os ydym am dyfu eglwysi iachusol ac iach, bydd angen i ni ddod yn fwy gwydyn a chadarn yn nysgyblaethau ysbrydol hunofol ar eglwys. Felly mae Justin Brierley yn y cylchgrawn y Spectator, 30 o Fawrth eleni, a gofyn, a oes ryw fath o adfywiad Cristnogol yn digwydd ym Mhrydain ar hyn o bryd? Gan seilio peth oedd adansoddiad ar addewidion y dihaint a gwag a'n ffyddiaeth newydd gan Hawkins, Harris ac Hitchens, a draethwyd ef yw bod addoliad ac ysbrydolwydd Cristnogol yn y parhau i fod yn ddeniadol a bod llawer yn hiraethu am rhywbeth mwy na defnyddioldeb, pur ar gyfer bywyd da. Roedd cyfres wych y BBEC, Pilgrimage, a ddangoswyd yn ddiweddar yn dangos y math o cwestiynau, gobeithion, ofnau a hiraeth sy'n cyffredin i bob un ohonom ni. Mae angen i ni roi ein hunain yn gyson i gariad ac i arfer Iesu Grist, gan ddod yn bobl ddilys, ddaddigar a gobeithiol gyda rhywbeth gwerth a'i rhannu. K.N. King came up with an intriguing title to their book, Radical Uncertainty. And they analyze how to make sense of complexity and in that context make wise decisions. Friends, dearly beloved in Christ, we have a God who found a way out of the grave. And as the disciples were to discover, he would not give them a blueprint for the future, but a promise that he would be there and, more importantly, would give all that we needed to navigate well. And that really is our task, once more, to trust and be courageous and to venture well. And in that, the Lord be with you. Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Chair, thank you.
Diolch yn fawr iawn am eich anerchiad hynod ddiddorol, heriol ac ysbrydoledig. Cawn gyfle nawr i drafod yr anerchiad gyda'r archesgob, a fyddech cystal a gwneud eich ffordd i'r darllenfa. We now have opportunity to debate, to discuss and question the Archbishop on his address. Can I ask you to make your way to the lectern and give your name and where you're from? Oh, diolch yn fawr.
I'm Sue Henley from the Diocese of St David's. Thank you, Archbishop, for your address. I've given much thought to this issue of how we develop teams in our ministry and how we grow this sense of collegiality in our ministry areas. I think historically we have priests who've worked individually, churches that have been used to doing their own thing within their own parish. And I'm very aware that we're still going through a period of change in that. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about how you'd see that collegiality working and being developed, and what changes are being made to incorporate this way of working within our training of ordinands and in a post-ministry training for clergy. Building teams is a skilled job. It's not easy. It's not a matter of just putting people together in a room and saying, get on with it. And I just wonder what we're doing to actually support people to adapt in their ministry.
Thank you for a wonderful question. I'm really grateful for it. I think there are three things I want in relation to the third point to perhaps invite Jeremy to say something more about the way in which the training is taking place in the context of St. Paddens. I'm sure he'll be able to say something about that. The first 2 points you make, first of all, I think that clergy isolation is one of the big challenges. We don't want clergy to be isolated from one another in the way in which they learn to minister. And bringing people together in larger units, I think, brings people together both in conversation but conferring. And I think trying to understand our context well and sharing the ministry task of discerning what is God saying to us in this place is a fundamental and critical role within, I think, leadership generally, and particularly for our mission and ministry areas. But the idea isn't that that discerning is then held by few, but rather the charisms of many. And I don't think that it's true that we've yet exhausted how to expand and nurture and care for those commissioned ministries that sit alongside ordained and also licensed lay ministries. This is not a new idea, but I think it remains embryonic in the life of the church in Wales. Some mission and ministry areas, I think, have done a great deal to bring, in addition to the nurturing of disciples, the commissioned ministries within their local context as a working practice. But not many, and there's much more to be done about that, which I think I want to commend to archdeacons and also to our ministry officers as a way of developing a broader base of ministry provision across the church in Wales.
Ian Black, nominated Dean of Newport. Thank you very much, Archbishop, for an address which was packed with all sorts of things you could spring off. But I want to just pick up on two things. One is your first point about the financial crisis of 2008 and why nobody spotted it, and also about narrative structure. Those who read the Financial Times will know the name Gillian Tett, who was a financial writer based in New York. She's now the provost of King's College, Cambridge, and she's a trained anthropologist. That's her background. And she went into the rooms of these companies in 2008 and before that, and she spotted that there was a big crisis looming because she read the room, and she realized that the narrative that these leaders of our industries and our big financial institutions were telling themselves was duff. They didn't actually know what was going on. They didn't understand the economics, they didn't understand the businesses, and she just thought this is all going to crash. And she said that, and she got, shouted down and patronized and told she didn't know what she was talking about. Well, we all know what happened. It did go crash. And she's written books like Anthrovision, where we can use anthropology to think about how we read ourselves and read our own institutions, and one on silos as well, which are both fabulous books. I recommend them. The question it raises for me is about how do we check out the narrative which we are living by as a church, that it's actually current and it's rooted in Christian vision, but actually is not duff, and we're not telling ourselves and deluding ourselves in bolstering something which actually really needs some serious questions. How do we actually do that? That's my question. Thank you.
Ian, thank you. It's a brilliant question. If you get time, it's quite a complex read, but the Mark Carney work, Values, is worth a read. And his take on what happened is that the level of contingency was so great around 2008 that it was very hard to spot the kind of ripples that actually then led to the catastrophe of the economic crisis. And I think for us as a church, we are committed, and we've stated that we exist for, of course, the glory of our Lord Jesus Christ and for the people of Wales. We remain committed to serving all of the people of Wales. That's, if you like, our essential purpose. When we break that down into the constituent bits, we find ourselves in the arena of mission and ministry areas, and the way in which worshipping God, growing the church, loving the world, as it were, sits within that structure. And I think in my address, as well as affirming the broad narrative of who we are and why we're here, what are we trying to do, I wanted to say that there are certain things in a complex world that we can be certain of. So I spoke about data, the importance of data, and making sure that what we say about ourselves can actually be backed up. Do we have the information to hand which shows us? So, for example, we've been challenged recently in the Church Growth Fund, if we are going to spend lots of money, isn't it wise, isn't it judicious and proper that we should find a mechanism that actually checks whether or not that's making any difference whatsoever to our life? If we've asked St. Paddens to engage with us in a process of developing our recruitment, we know that's one of the great challenges that we face within the life of the church. Are we going to test whether or not the data supports that the inputs producing outputs? We get more people offering themselves for ministry. So I think what I want, as it were, for us to embed within our life is not only very clear perimeters about who we are, our narrative story, but also to ensure that the infrastructures are put in place around data, around deployability, around the kinds of things against which we can benchmark our life. And perhaps we've not had to work quite in this way before, but I think that in relation certainly to the Church Growth Fund, we've made a really good start. Perhaps we're on the start of redefining how we ensure that we remain consistent to our stated aims and objectives. We are here to serve the people of Wales in the name of Christ.
Diolch. Nessa, the next speaker, please.
Hello, Governors and Your Grace. Thank you so much for an invitation to come down today. The church plays a big part in my life, and I don't go in four walls, but I'm out there every day in the great outdoors. And for 6 years of my life, I've dedicated to protecting our rivers of Wales and the UK. And data is key, and the church is about fairness and justice and supporting the Welsh people. And we really ask you to thank you for your words of support for our rivers, but we know the Wye is on the verge of ecological collapse, the Usk is in dire straits, and all of the Welsh rivers are. I spend my days training up volunteers, gathering data, using that data. I've spoken in Westminster to try and get change and movement. And we all sit in our own comfort zones, but we have to be uncomfortable about this because at the end of the day, water is life. And, you know, if the awareness is growing, the voice is growing, but the church is really important to so many people, and it has a voice as well. And if you can support us in bringing change and helping our rivers survive, because to look at them, I spend a lot of time below the surface monitoring aquatic life, and the deterioration in our rivers is just drastic. And that comes from, on the right, intensive agriculture pollution. There's fabulous farmers out there, and then we've got intensive poultry farming, which isn't farming. And then we've got the big Welsh water companies that are pumping sewage into our rivers, and this isn't me just saying it, it's out there. So we really all need to get together, and I thank you for letting me come up today and having your support. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr.
Chair, can I just remind governing body tomorrow, 2 people who will speak a little bit about the conference, the summit, the end of the year will be present. They can speak far more eloquently than I can about this, and I'm sure that they would want to endorse all that you've said.
Diolch yn fawr. Our next speaker.
Jeremy Duff, Principal of St Paddens. Would it help, Archbishop, if I just filled in the third bit to your answer?
Of course.
So 2 parts to my answer in relation to the really important question about teams. The first is to tell you what we do. The second is to point out that that's not really the end of the question. So in terms of team working, just really to reassure, just to give across the facts, it's one of the 6 main criteria in selection. That's not St Paddens' role, but in the discernment. It is one of our 6 criteria in all our report writing. So as bishops have received paperwork on potential ordinands and readers and others over the last few weeks. 1 of 6 criteria there. It is a major part of training, so the next residential for ordinands and trainee lay licensed ministers in a couple of weeks' time, half of that is focused, half of the main input is focused around the topic of team working. And it's very important in our work with our NLM phase, really the work with curates. Alongside of that, though, most of St Paddens, we're not an isolated group who then you give people to and we train them and give them back. A lot of it is about the work in placements with the church and obviously with our curates. It's about the modelling and seeing it lived out in our parishes. However, that is talking about inputs, and the Archbishop just pointed out we need outputs, not inputs. And I suppose the comparison would be, we spend quite a lot of time teaching people how to preach. Does that mean every sermon you hear in the Church of Wales is good? No, it doesn't. And so it is a major issue for us. We are on it and have the inputs, but I think that bigger question of how overall as a church we're better at that, at the team working, and how we can play our part, but it's a long agenda. There's a lot of work for us to do, but we do attend to it. Thank you.
Diolch.
Thank you, Your Grace, for your wonderful words. Max Boyce once said, "I was there." And so what I'm going to say is slightly confessional, because between 1990 and 2008, I was there in the City of London. My last job was right by the River Thames, right by the Millennium Bridge, working in a building that was built to celebrate the millennium, to be a festival building of all that was good about the financial services industry. It sat between St Paul's Cathedral and the Tate Modern. It was built in 2000. If you go there now, it's a pile of rubble on the floor. There's something, I think, quite interesting about vanity projects. And the reality is, and I slightly disagree with the authors of that book, and would agree with Dean Ian, lots of people did know. They really did know. But there were two problems, and they were about the stories we told ourselves when we worked in the city, and I, to my shame, told myself. We are invincible. This will carry on. And that bit of the Bible about the love of money being the root of all evil, it's not really true. Those were some of the stories we told ourselves. And we fostered in that industry a culture of fear, or lack of transparency and openness, where to go to the chief executive or the chairman and say, I'm worried about this, was to sign your own redundancy notice. We had a culture of fear which we massaged, put in false robes by saying there's nothing wrong with the love of money and we are invincible. If you were a hedge fund manager in 2008, you thought you were invincible. You told yourself that story, even if you knew it wasn't true. So we have to tell true stories, and we have to do so from a place of fragility. Because it's in our fragility as a church that we will find our authenticity. It's not in false notions of resilience. It's not in saying we're invincible with the church. You know, we have all this history, all this tradition. It's in saying we are a limping people. We are Emmaus Road people. We are people that carry wounds and scars, and we relate to people who carry scars and wounds, and we walk with them. And in that moment of walking, we discover ourselves, and something called revelation happens. And we need to read those ancient biblical stories that invite us to be a blessing to all people, whatever they're like. And we need to be a deeply confessional church that allows ourselves to be a little bit hurt when we hear stories that are uncomfortable. And it's due to a wonderful priest, an ordinary parish priest who one day spoke on that parable about the rich young ruler, that I suddenly thought to myself, I cannot work in this system. I know it's not true. I know the stories we're telling ourselves aren't true, and I was too scared to tell anybody. And I never want to work in an institution like that again. The church must be a place where all may flourish and none need fear. And that comes back to the stories we tell and the stories we read and how we relate to each other. I want to be part of a fragile church, not a resilient church. Fragile church that walks with its limping, wounded status alongside people with a wounded status. And as I came to this place, I stood on the Millennium Bridge in Newport, and I thought, this is where I want to be. This is where I need to be, in this place. I have no idea why. God works in funny ways. But let us find our authenticity in our fragility, because then we will tell true stories.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have to curtail your speech. Thank you. Do you want to respond?
I just want to endorse everything that Andrew has said, and say one of the reasons why we've convened a learning community is in order to tell the true stories, to hear the truth about the way things are, and to learn from it. Wounded Healer seems to me particularly pertinent for us at this time. If we can do that, we'll have done something really good.
Diolch yn fawr. Before the next speaker, could I ask members that when they approach the lectern that they give their name and the diocese that they're from, and could you address questions to the Archbishop on his address? Thank you very much, and keep them crisp and clear.
Certainly. Richard Woods, elected cleric from Bangor. As a Tottenham Hotspur fan, our trophy cabinet is more full of cobwebs than trophies, so I'm not going to question Mr. Klopp too much. But on risks and mistakes, how culturally ready do you think the Church in Wales is across its breadth to be a risk-taking church? And do we have appropriate forums, and are the learning communities visible enough, wide enough, broad enough to do the learning from our mistakes?
Richard, great question, thank you. I think that the degree to which we are prepared to break new ground, taking us beyond where we are, is the measure of our courage and vision. So if all we do is a series of repetitions, however holy, treasured and good they are, we're likely to see a continuation of what we currently live with. So we do need to find ways. But of course we have to be wise and discerning as well. And if there is something that is utterly outlandish, there is no evidence to back up that this is going to be worthwhile the investment. Perhaps we might, with a more judicious discernment, say, perhaps no. And that's part of the discernment. Your question was, to what extent is the church across Wales prepared to be more adventurous and risk-taking? My sense that it is, and is growing in that. And that is much to be commended. Do I think that we have yet the breadth of bases on which the learning can take place? No, we don't. But I do want to say that in the next year we are going to be engaging more with our archdeacons, and we are going to be engaging more with others perhaps, bringing and widening the circle of those whose voice will help us shape not only a culture, but a decision-making process that is likely to be more comprehensive and wiser as a result. Thank you.
Diolch. The next member, please.
Rosie Diamond, cleric Bangor, yr oedd yn siarad yn y Gymraeg. Wel, diolch ar Chesgob am anerchiad mor ysbrydoledig, wir yn gwerthfawrogi. Diolch hefyd am bwysleisio pwysigrwydd naratif, stori a creu le i bobl cymryd risgiau a gwneud camgymeriadau. Wrth i fi meddwl am yr anerchiad, mae rhaid i fi feddwl am gymeriad yr arglwydd Iesu a'i hun ac yr ffordd yr oedd o yn weinidogaethu. Fel rhywun sy'n ychydig o anarac ac yn hoff iawn o mathemateg a statisteg, yr oedd efo cwestiwn reit fyr, ond falle dim mor syml. Wrth i ni wneud statisteg, mae angen i ni adlewyrchu gwerthwydd yr Efengyl. Felly yr oedd am ofyn i chi, sut ydych chi'n bwriadu mesur a gwerthfawrogi camgymeriadau?
Mae hwnna'n cwestiwn da, diolch, Rosie. Camgymeriadau, mae'n dibynnu ar y fath o gamgymeriadau i ni'n gweld, ond falle mae dysgu sydd yn dod i ni ar sail cronfa efengylu wedi darparu eisoes y fath o adfyfyrio ar beth sydd wedi digwydd. Enghraifft, mae'n gwbl glir yn awr, os na'r prosiect mawr i ni yn lansio yn un o'r esgobaethau, mae rhaid sicrhau bod y strwythurau sydd yn bodoli o dan y prosiect yn ddigonol. Ac wrth gwrs mae hwn yn rhywbeth newydd. Dyn ni ddim yn falle cyfarwydd ar project management, ond mwyn sicrhau bod yr arian yn cael ei gwerthu mewn modd sydd yn ddoeth ac yn call, yn awgrymu bod mae'r fath o buddsoddiad yna sydd yn dod o allan beth sydd wedi digwydd, y ffordd lle dyn ni wedi ffeili, yn rhoi esiampl da i ni. Ond hefyd, nid yn y prosiectau o'r fath dwi newydd jyst wedi disgrifio. Nath Andrew ar Deion Casnewydd wedi dweud wrthym bod mae pethau sylfaenol, dwi ddim yn siŵr beth yw'r gair, dilys, authentic, ym mha ffordd ydyn ni'n dangos yn ein bywyd ni bod pobl yn yr eglwys yng Nghymru yn real. Dros cyfnod Pasg, ges i'r cyfle i weld Barbie. Pink, perfect plastic. Ond dwi ddim yn gweithio o gwbl. A mae stori yna yn gwbl ddiddorol oherwydd y ffordd maen nhw'n trio navigatio eu bywydau mewn modd sydd yn gwbl newydd. Beth fydd yn gwneud y traws newid mwyaf yng Nghymru yw lle bod pobl yn gweld pobl sydd yn fregus, fel mae Andrew wedi dweud, pobl sydd yn real, ond pobl sydd yn maddau hefyd. And os yna ni yn ymgyleddu ar hen bethau o fod yn debyg i Iesu Grist, nad yw'r ffordd lle fe fyddwn ni'n gweld newid yn ein bywydau ni.
Diolch yn fawr. The next member, please.
Diolch. Heather Payne, lay elected member Llandaff and very much not retired, just in case you were wondering. Thank you very much, Andy. That was the real grit in the oyster that we need. Hands up if you are not addicted to your smartphone. Honestly, well, but that's actually most of you are, as I am. So I just want to use that point about how we get ahead of the curve and actually focus on what people not only need, but don't realise they need until they have it. Radical uncertainty, certainly, and I think we are not a business, but we need to be business-like. The humility to be listening and really hearing, the flexibility to deal with the unanticipated, knowing that things will be uncertain, using behavioural insights to modify what we do and be reflexive as well as reflective about our core business, the marks of mission, tell, teach, tend, transform, treasure, but also to really capitalise on our USP, which is the certainty, I'll leave taxes, of our great reward. And that is so much needed. It was needed during COVID. I don't think we stepped up to the plate, but it continues to be needed. So how can we use our assets? How can we develop our skills to make sure that we can respond to what people really need, even if they don't realise they need it?
Yeah.
But thank you.
What a great question. And can I just say to you, Heather, thank you for the constant challenge you present to us to be reflecting on those whom we are called to serve and listening to them. I really appreciate that. I've got a name drop. I must do this. I'm so sorry. Well, no, I'm not going to apologise because it's naked and it's ridiculous. I spent time yesterday on the train with Mike Peters, lead singer of The Alarm. Do you remember The Alarm? I had 4 hours with this guy to myself. It was peach. It was completely wonderful. And because he had faith background, and I wanted to talk to him about the drive of his life. What is it that makes him tick? And when we learn to talk God well, I suppose one of the things that struck me about the pilgrimage programme on television is the extraordinary openness of these people who had their own kind of baggage, but a deep willingness to engage. So my charge, I suppose, in anticipation of 2 days' time to our governing body is, can we learn to talk God well? Not false narratives, but the realities that we live with, our hopes, our dreams, our disappointments, in a way that is profoundly authentic. And if we are seen to be people of Jesus Christ, it is that in the early pages of Scripture proved to be so irrepressibly, beautifully powerful, but not in a wrong sense. It was the lives that were changed that had the great impact. Let's do God well.
Our next member, Aelod Nessa.
Thank you, Chair, members of the governing body. Paul McNess, Archdeacon of St David's, nominated Archdeacon, Diocese of St David's. Your Grace, as an Archdeacon, you'd expect me to be practical. Now, you've talked a lot about the need for data, for qualitative and quantitative information. We also live in an age that is also very compliance-based, and we have to have a number of regulatory requirements upon us. Now, in order for all of those things to happen, somebody has to collate information, somebody has to produce the information, somebody has to record the information, and then transmit it to the people that need to have it in order for us to learn from it. In the early church, the deacons were appointed to free up the apostles to do the work of the church, to proclaim the gospel, to evangelize. Administration is one of the perhaps less sexy ministry gifts of the Spirit, but it is a vital one nevertheless. And I wonder what your views are on us needing to put resources, training, identification, and finance into identifying administrators in order to take that work that we need to do to free up the apostles amongst us to do what they need to do.
Thanks, Paul. It's a great question, and I'm really grateful to those dioceses who've begun to appoint administrators. Let's just sort of unpack that a little bit. We know that the way in which we handle and manage data is extremely important. There are some horror stories from the insurance world where lists of contacts have been unattended to for a number of years, and even the holding of the information, which is no longer useful to that company, has invited a serious fine. So that's one area where the way in which we handle data. Then we're very conscious of safeguarding. We're also very conscious of the way in which health and safety regulations have increased, not decreased. Now, when as a church we have to function in that world of greater regulation, we clearly do need the people who are well-versed, well-practiced. And I suspect the model, which I know is present in Swansea and Brecon, of looking to appoint on behalf of mission and ministry areas, either on an archidiaconal basis or to each mission and ministry area, is probably going to have to be developed, particularly where we share those kinds of appointments where a DBF might become increasingly an employer of people, as well as the way in which a job description or a ministry agreement is in place, in a ministry area. That is going to need to be managed in a way that is bespoke and particular. So your question is, have we got enough? No, we haven't. Will we need more? Yes, we will. And I think we need to hear from those dioceses who are perhaps a little bit ahead of the curve. What does that look like, and how can we ensure that it delivers real value for money? And I suspect you might have something to say about this as well. Thanks, Paul.
Diolch. And the last one, yr un ola.
Kate O'Sullivan, cleric from Monmouth Diocese. Thank you very much for your address, Archbishop. I felt really encouraged and excited by it. I'm also quite a practical person, and interested to hear what Jeremy had to say about training. I come from a background of health and social care and counselling, where it's very much a learning environment where we share together, counsellors, and then when I was in health and wellbeing services, how in a very open and honest and unconditional way we shared together our struggles and learnt from each other. And more recently, I've spent the last nearly 2 years doing Reconciling Mission, which Bishop Cherry kindly sent me to. And we used action learning sets, which is a very similar process. And I'm wondering whether this is something that perhaps could be filtered down into the ministry areas and not just aimed at clergy, but the laity as well. Because in a sense, unless we're working together, clergy and laity, it's just going to be It's kind of going to feel very theoretical and something that people like that, who like that sort of thing, do, rather than it being part of the culture. I also think that that would reduce clergy isolation as well, actually, because it creates that learning environment and also fosters risk-taking.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Most of my colleagues in a mission or ministry area council actually almost dread meetings of the MAC. It's something that they approach with a sense sometimes of dread. I'd love us for us to create a culture within our churches where those are the most life-giving of all of our meetings, in which we ask ourselves, how can we together be the body of Christ in this place? How can we own an agenda of vital love and service? What does it look like? How are we going to align our energies, our resources, in order to be that? How are we going to bless one another rather than being competitively and defended in our stature within our mission and ministry areas? But we're a long, long way from that. The process of action learning is something we did trial in the Diocese of Bangor, and with limited success. That's not to say I don't believe in them, I do, but we didn't find a way of making it work in our diocese. But what I would really love is for someone during this governing body to be able to stand up here and say, in terms of the way in which we work our ministry area council or mission area council, this is what we do, and it's really great. And let me tell you a little bit about the way in which we started to shape our lives and our agendas in a way that's engaging, permission-giving, respectful, authentic. Now, if we could hear stories like that, that would be wonderful.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much. Right. The session has run over by a quarter of an hour, so we're going to take a break for coffee, and I'm going to ask you to return at 12:15 promptly so that we can address item 6, 7 and 8. I don't want a reputation of being a chair that causes you to have your lunch too late. So please be prompt in returning after break. Thank you.